Thanks to one of the members of our Spanish-speaking group for providing some change for Schultz Lewis. That's one of the big fundraising efforts there. Thanks to someone else who gave some printer cartridges. So that's another way to raise money for the children, is if you have a printer and you have cartridges. These are just some little ones, you know, they're expensive but little. But Schultz Lewis gets about 50 cents for these. And if you have those bigger ones, they get several dollars for those, even when they're empty. So thanks for thinking of Schultz Lewis. But we're doing well there, increasing the number of children that we're serving and drawing together a staff of committed Christians to care for children. And hello, Darlena.
Hello, good morning.
Everything going well after a Friday?
Yes.
So Paul, looking at the first letter to Timothy, and we're at about chapter 3. In fact, we are at chapter 3, thinking about the church and what is going on in this letter. Paul is writing to a young preacher on how church should be, how it should look, what's it going to be like. And so we begin, as we look at this chapter, to think about, well, in any organization, there has to be leadership, there has to be oversight, I guess we might say. There has to be power. I majored in line with the sermon here that we just heard. I majored in political science when I was at the University of Illinois, and we got into that a little bit. And one of the students asked the professor, "What is politics? What is politics?" And the answer was one word: politics is power. So I thought of that when we heard that lesson about power, about real power in the hands of God, because that's where it lies. And that would solve a lot of our political issues, wouldn't it, if we kept in mind that the real power is God. And we're a little off, but as we read the history of God's relation with his people, that's how his intent would have been fulfilled, that he was the power, he was the king, but the people wanted to organize a little differently. They wanted their own king. Well, this is the New Testament as we read chapter 3. We don't have a king in the church. I guess we'd say that God is the king because he's the one that really has the power. So, but on earth, we have people called overseers. And sometimes we get entangled, who is it? Anyway, the word that came to my mind as we read that first verse is, if a person sets his heart or desires the office in the old version, it's a noble task, a noble task. It's a task, it's work. So that's one thing. It's a desire to work. It's not a desire for influence or anything, but it's a desire to work. And what is involved in that? He sets forth some qualifications, and we've gone over these, and we'll just read them again. The overseer must be above reproach, the husband of but one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him with proper respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. He must also have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Basically, you have to be a perfect person, right? That's what it kind of sounds like. But none
That's
of
true.
somebody said that's right. That there are no perfect people. So overseers are human beings, are going to make mistakes, are going to fall short, and yet that's God's way of organizing the church. And if it's God's way, we can trust that it is the best way for the church to be most effective. It's interesting that, well, what else do you think about when you think of overseers? Another word is elders, another word used in the place is pastors. Shepherd, the pastor is a shepherd. It's not just one man, because in other places we read about ordaining elders in every church. It's corporate leadership. What else? How are elders chosen? How do you become one? Do you say, I'm an elder now? I meet the qualifications?
I think they all go to the same category. And the final word is blameless.
Okay, I'm sorry, say that again.
Blameless.
Blameless.
What?
Blameless.
Blameless, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Well, in our congregation here, we have a way of, I think, it seems like, the current elders kind of look at the people and try to identify those who might be qualified to be elders and perhaps, approach them and ask. That seems to me the way that it's been done. Now, I don't know, in your experience as an elder, have you had a man approach you and say, like it says here, I desire to be an elder? Have you ever had? I mean,
I have
it
not,
almost-
I don't know if anybody else who served as an elder has had somebody volunteer.
it seems like that's almost, it's a little conceited or something,
That's,
you wanna, but it doesn't, it isn't approached like that here. It seems like that's something that a person might do. To say, I really feel,
Yeah, if anyone sets his heart or
Yeah.
desires.
is that taking too much on yourself, or is that okay?
I guess, it wouldn't be, I mean, according to the scripture, I just never seen it that way. Maybe other churches have it that way, that some people volunteer. Sometimes we might put forth and say, if there are any that feel they meet the qualifications, come forward and let us know if you're willing to serve. But usually the initiative is taken by the church through its elders or through some other group or some other way to approach the individual and say, we think that you serve, let's talk about that.
It's not usually a surprise, is it? It's someone who's already active and demonstrating.
Yeah,
I mean,
usually it's someone who is working hard already. Here, like you say, usually it's some names are put before the congregation with the opportunity for anybody who feels that they have not met the qualifications to come forward and say so. And that has happened in the past. And, you have to deal with that.
Well, Alan, when I was, before I became in part of the Christian church, when I was in what they would call a Protestant, the church, it was called Church of God in Christ and Sanctified Church. What people would ask to be elders.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, the congregation didn't know, they were asked
Okay.
the pastor or the other elders. And my understanding, I don't know nothing about it, because I never did it. But my understanding, I'm on the outside looking in, is what they would do is, I think they probably one of their qualifications, and then they had to go to some training.
Okay.
Schools, schooling about the Bible and certain other things, but that was kept private. So I don't know how they went about it, I know people have asked, and then some of them would say, I was called to be an elder. This was different, I was called to be an elder, so I should be an elder, but that was never out and open as we do in the Christian church. That was, you wouldn't even know who asked either.
That's interesting.
They wouldn't tell you who asked. And you wouldn't know, at least from my experience, I'm only talking from one person's experience.
Yeah.
But the people they didn't normally put in those positions were people that were pretty, had a clean background, wholesome, and met these qualifications. Again, you don't know, because people private lives are people private lives. Let's be honest. But they would do that, some of them say they were born and they grew up to be an elder.
Yeah.
But the elders in the past, they would handle that privately, and before you know that person was an elder or wasn't. And I'm just talking from a total different perspective.
You said something that intrigued me there. You said, well, there was some training.
Oh, yeah.
And, maybe that's something we need to think about, some training.
They didn't just put you there.
Yeah.
They had to, probably had, I don't know if they actually made them go to the Christian schools or whatever, but I know they had to train them,
That's interesting.
And before they even, and then you would ask, or apply however it went, and then they train them, and it didn't happen right away. It wasn't, it was a process,
Wow.
But again, you didn't know as a regular member, you didn't know what the process was, because they didn't make that public knowledge.
That seems bad to me, to keep it a secret arcane thing, that's not the objective.
Well, sometimes you're discussing people's lives, you need to have some privacy, but,
I think the reason Paul goes over this stuff is to sort of say that their lives should be an open book.
well,
If they're going to serve in a capacity like that, in which presumably they're shepherding other people, helping them with their problems, then their lives in turn should.
well, maybe there should be more openness.
If there's something you feel you have to keep in, that's probably a bad sign that you're not meeting with them.
Well, but you have to look at it another way, even people that are elders and pastors or, they make human mistakes too. And within their family, within their marriage, with their children. And as I was reading here, when you were just saying, all of that stuff, people don't want that out of them. And everybody doesn't forgive the same. We don't. We be like, oh, he did that, and he did it, why would he, cause it's complicated, let's just put it like that, it's very complicated.
It is.
It's very complicated because there have been elders that got demoted and then got promoted, and it's complicated for whatever reasons.
I mean, sometimes you meet with a person and, they'll say, there's some things in my past that,
Yeah, that's what
I
that's
just don't
exactly
think
what I'm saying.
that, should be an elder and,
I think preachers are,
Alan, what's the youngest elder at our church?
who's probably, Renee or Patrick, I'm not sure. Who's the youngest? What,
preachers are ordained to appoint elders, because the preachers are given that authority
to appoint elders because will study each and every one in the church. They will not tell you, but they will still study your movements, everything that you do, the way you behave.
Yeah.
Sometimes they even enter your home without that is how it happened somehow outside that I know to enter into your marriage with your children, your behavior. If it's a blameless, yes, blameless doesn't mean that you will not, find yourself mistaken somehow. No. But our personal value, we have some mistakes in our life.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, you'll be very conscious of not getting there. Normally, Church of Christ, formally, the worst sin that we normally sin is fornication. The worst sin. If you see here, Church of Christ is, hey, he fornicate, then you are the worst sinner. That's how we sin it. But that is not the point. That's not the point. All sin are sin. All sin are
That's
sin.
right.
That's it.
So,
So if we talk about blameless, like all the category that he points out, don't be into drunkenness, don't be into, fornication, be somebody, if somebody is having a problem, she or he can easily approach and say, this
That's
is
right.
the mentor.
That's
He
right.
can approach you to say something to you. Elders are there to protect the preacher, to move the congregation on. They are not taking the power from the preacher. So that's why if you go to the second Timothy, there, Paul's still telling Timothy to stand strong after appointing the elders. If some of the elders even gets wrong, he should be bold enough to do what?
Yeah.
To correct them.
that's right.
You see? So I think that is a very kind job for the preacher to lay down his eyes and see those who are, on the way to those, ways so that he can choose them. He can point you, he can, call you on and say, do you want this position? Can you do it? Or this thing? Sometimes they'll even ask you, do you think something has disqualified you for this? Naturally, he has known your background, everything already, but you don't even know.
I think some of that can be cultural, Jacob, and probably is very
That's
true
exactly.
from where, in Ghana that's there. But if you think about the first century church, we had apostles at that time, and they appointed the elders, at least in the early churches. That was there. It was the apostles that appointed elders in every one of the churches. And I don't know the sequencing of how that happened once you didn't have apostles all the way to where we are today. But like in the South, you have different models in the churches that you run. So for example, in the historical African-American churches, they run as a general rule, a very pastoral model where the preacher is kind of the center of the church, or responsible for its growth, et cetera, as compared to a more traditional where it's the eldership and then the preacher would report into the eldership, or sometimes you have a combination where, like with Patrick, he's both a preacher, and an elder that's there. So I think it can, you can also have some cultural influences on that. It would be different.
You are right. You are right. That's do happen when sometimes when the preachers are appointing the elders, normally you see the study itself, when we study it and then you are not careful, you would think that at the end of the day, when the elders come, the preacher become another elders. You understand? But when I study the second Timothy, I can see that no, that is not the point. Still, the preacher has power over the elders, unless you are elder preacher. We have elder preacher, the preacher who is also an elder.
Yeah.
We have that one, elder preacher. But those elders that preacher have appointed, ordained to the church, you are there to support the preacher, to support the preacher to move the congregation on. You are not there to take over the preacher.
Well,
No, you are there to support the preacher.
the overseers are just that, to oversee the church. Sometimes the preacher wants to oversee the church, but that's not his function. It's
I
a
was gonna
different
say, I've
function.
seen it both ways. I've seen it, but like you say, they are there to,
Yeah,
they're overseers, that's what they're,
that's right.
that's what they're doing. But I've seen it the other way around also.
Sometimes some preachers wanna take over, and sometimes it's because nobody else will do anything, that the preacher has to kind of step into a leadership role to get things done. And that's not a good thing either.
In Titus chapter 1, Paul says that he left Titus behind, told Titus to appoint elders in every town.
Okay,
And I think that where we are with church development, there's a point at which churches, congregations have been established and they haven't grown to the point where they can have others. There in 1 Timothy chapter 3 says that you can't be a novice, not a new Christian, because you'll get puffed up, which I think tells us a lot too about our walk, and that the longer we have been in the faith, the more humble we'll be in our role. If someone is to be an elder, if they've been a Christian a while, they've interacted with Christ enough to know their place and
Or they should.
and inherent in that too is being beyond reproach, and being blameless, because all of that is a matter of understanding that your righteousness doesn't come from yourself, it comes from Christ, and that we all make mistakes, but that we're all trying to conform ourselves to Him. But I'm getting off track.
no, that's okay.
I think that what Paul is telling Titus, and I think this again goes back to the organization of the church in the first century versus where it was to morph and move to where we are today, which is that elders are put in place so that you have a plurality of faithful men who are mature in the faith and have shown their ability to be leaders in their own homes, have shown their ability to make wise decisions based on godly wisdom, and therefore they are the head of the church. That a preacher, I believe that when a preacher, if a preacher says, okay, these three men are qualified to be elders, we need an eldership because that's God's model for the church, and they appoint those three men to be elders, that preacher now becomes subordinate to them because they are the overseers. They are now in charge, and it is their job, because it's not in God's design that one person should have say over the entire congregation. It's not that there should be a plurality, so there's not that lordship of one person who directs everything.
It's the wisdom of God.
Well, I'm thankful that our founding fathers in our country also obtained some of that wisdom. A lot of them were very biblically literate, and preachers actually that formed our country, and that's why we have division of power in our country like we do. You got the judicial branch, you got the legislative, and you got a president that has limited power. Half the people in this country, when this country started, wanted the president to be a king. They wanted him to have all the power like the guy over in England. So I'm just saying this is carried over to our country, and I think we can appreciate it. Things work a lot better that way.
Yeah, I think that's God's.
You see, I'm in again simple because this issue is very, very important. In the sense that in Church of Christ congregations, a lot, when we appoint the elders, even the preacher himself sometimes feel that he became under the elders.
Became what?
He now is, under the elders.
Okay.
He have to submit to the elders in the church. But if you go back to, as we are saying, that the apostle points elders that time, let me say, there is no more much preachers to take in charge of the churches, to go around the churches. Preacher do, appoint elders here, and the preacher goes to another place for another congregation to, so formally, when this thing was steady in, let me go back to, I always refer to Africa.
Okay.
Sorry to say that. It referred to us, we think that preacher, after you appoint the elders, you have to do what? To move on to another.
Okay.
That is our this thing. That if you appoint the elders, then leave the church for the elders and do what? And go to, and plant another
Sure,
church,
another one.
to another place. That's what Paul was doing then.
That's kind of the model of Paul and Timothy and
Was doing that.
Titus.
Exactly. But later on, when I studied the 2 Timothy, as we are going,
Sure.
and I see that no, that's not the point now, because now when the preacher, nothing was forcing the preacher to leave the church. The elders don't have to force the preacher to what? Leave the church to another place. No. The elders were appointed to oversee affairs together with whom? The preacher. The elders will not force the preacher to leave pulpits for them. No. Preacher is still in charge of all those affairs. The elders are going to support him. We have many committees in the church, how to run them. You see, the reason why appointing the elder is very, very patient work is you cannot start and run the church today and then tomorrow you say you're going to choose elders, but you can have leaders. I think there's a difference between the two. Leaders. The leaders will see some days affair up to some time to study them to see that can we get elders from deacons from these people, or if you have some organization to do those kind of things, because you cannot just plan the church today within 6 months time, 1 year time, and then you can get all the quality you were looking for from the church. But sincerely, as we are going on, we are all deliberating on the quotation, the chapter 2. When we get there, we will see certain things that, it's not pointing the preacher to point the elders and then move to another place because of his work as the other. If they say you are overseer, a bishop, overseer, you are also a person who will go day and day after to other churches to see what is going on over there. As an elder, as a bishop, as a pastor, it's your duty also.
To do what now?
To oversee other groups.
To see what is going on around the churches around.
You see what's going on.
Oh, yeah.
Each church
Each church
is to have its own overseers.
Yeah, you are overseer.
As far as we can tell from the scriptures, that's the way that the Lord wants it organized. Yeah.
Good.
So the one who's over the whole church is Christ, and that's the only one who's over the whole church. And that's I think a wise decision, so that the church is not drawn astray by one or by a few men. Maybe one congregation goes astray, but the rest stay true to the word. So, but yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the early church, as we got away from the apostles, as they all started to die, a lot of well-meaning men started to think, well, I really want to protect the church.
Yeah.
And I'm wise enough to be able to look at these other churches. And before you know it, you start to have men who then had these areas, and they had multiple churches. And eventually you look up one day and you have the Roman Catholic Church with a pope.
Yeah.
So it didn't start that way. It started with well-meaning people saying, I want to protect that church over there and this church over here and this church. But before you know it, it became a power struggle. And you have these massive regions of, then the whole structure comes into place with bishops and cardinals and then popes fighting against each other. I think you see God's wisdom in saying, let's keep everything in one church. One church is a family, and that family is going to take care of itself.
The analogy of a shepherd is such a great analogy for that, because a shepherd lives, breathes, eats his sheep. You know, he's with them. When you see a shepherd, he's gonna smell like sheep. It's hard to be a shepherd of a herd that is not there with you, that you're not with all.
Yeah, yeah. And it's the elders who, we're told, are responsible for the souls of the congregation. They're answerable for how people are doing spiritually, and that's quite a responsibility. Sometimes you talk about the preacher. Sometimes the preacher is there for a while and moves on, as in the New Testament. And it used to be more the case in the old days. Here now we find preachers staying for extended periods more than they used to, I think.
They've learned that the only way they can be effective is to stay in one location for a long period of time. Just to, go to our church for 3 years and move on.
Yeah.
But that's a
Not
very,
much good,
I agree that that's a very US-centric model, where that is not an evangelical model. It's not a missionary model where you're going into new places, you're teaching the Bible, establishing church, and trying to build a church up to be self-sustaining. And often people that are in that type of role, a missionary and evangelist, et cetera, they've accomplished that purpose there, and they're going to the next region.
Well, it's
the
a
next
different kind of
town. It's a
preacher.
different
We're
model.
talking about located preacher. Yeah, all kinds.
I think one final thing on.
No, go ahead. Sure.
But 2 Timothy chapter 4, you mentioned 2 Timothy. Paul's telling Timothy what he is to do as a preacher. And he says, fulfill the work of an evangelist.
Right.
That's your job. Your job is not to meddle in the administration of a congregation. Your job is to be an evangelist. Your job is to teach and to provide sound doctrine to the flock, but you're not an overseer. And I think it's important because I think he lays out for us what that role is for the preacher versus what it is for an elder overseer.
Did the same thing in Acts when they first appointed the deacons, and they were having the challenges that were coming up, saying we're being neglected. And they said, we don't need to neglect the preaching of the word, therefore let's appoint some faithful men to take care of this need. It's the same example, I think, of what you're talking about. Different roles.
Okay. Any other comments? Different.
I think it all works. I mean, it works when you have leaderships. Those roles are in place for a reason. But the bottom line is our authority should be from God.
That's right.
What are we following according to the scripture?
That's right.
Let's follow it according to the scripture. And that's where the standard should be for leadership.
That's a
That's
test
how I
of
see it.
Amen.
any overseers. Are they overseeing in accordance with God?
According to what has been left for us in the scripture, because that's our print, that's our blueprint. That's what we're following.
Right.
We're not just rattling off our head what we think it should be.
Right.
We're following what the scripture has left as a blueprint for us to follow.
Right.
So if Christ is the standard, and that's where we lead it, then you shouldn't have no problem. I mean, most people understand what leadership roles are, and you don't have a problem with following those rules. Is especially because you should be able to discern and see, because individually you are responsible for where you are. So you should be able to see, are they following this according to the scripture? If so, I know what my role should be in that. I need to be following what the leadership is giving out. Because the standard is set by who's in charge, who's in control for the unit.
That's right, that's the bottom line. So, what about deacons?
Follow the same. What's the standard? Let's follow the standard.
So often an elder is a deacon first. When I was just a young lad here at the congregation, we had an elder Dan remembers him, Fred Boyd.
Yeah, he was never a deacon.
Well, he was a deacon and then he was made an elder. And then his job transferred him to another location. And so he was gone for about 3 years. And then his job brought him back to
I
Chicago.
didn't remember that.
And so his name was again put before the congregation to be an elder of the church. And I remember saying to my parents, and I must have been about 10 years old, well, they can't appoint him an elder, he's got to be a deacon first. That's the only pattern that I see until that time. And that's when I learned a little bit more about the difference between elders and
Do you
deacons.
know he's been one before?
Yeah, yeah.
Thankfully, God's word allows things to be a little more flexible. Like we have a minister that's an elder right now.
Yeah,
That's a pattern going on, I think, in a lot of churches. So he meddles with the churches every day, ongoing events, plus he's preaching the word.
Yeah.
So he does a little of everything, and he's like a deacon, also.
Well,
He does
Also
everything.
for you, I'm actually working with a church in Atlanta who's struggling with the question of can you have deacons and not have elders?
yeah, well, what do you think?
I didn't have a clear answer, but as I think about it, to me, the word deacon means servant.
Yeah,
And I think if we didn't call them deacons, we would just call them servants, we'd have no problems with it.
Yeah.
But work has to be done.
right,
And we're saying that this person is going to serve in that role to do this work. Whatever it is, pay the bills,
Right.
clean up the parking lot, whatever it is. But for some reason, when we throw the word deacon out there, people get really nervous. I think you can have deacons without elders, because they're servants. But, I mean, I don't have a scripture to go to and say, this church had deacons and no elders.
I think the challenge is authority, that I think that's just the biggest thing, is that a deacon doesn't have any authority, right? Is not an overseer. And so if you have someone who has a role and title, they may start to feel as if they have some. So I think as long as you can avoid that, superior kind of a notion, that makes sense.
The bottom line is, every church has to have a bottom line person. It doesn't matter if it's a minister or elder or deacon, board of trustees, somebody has to make bottom line decisions, or that church will eventually just fall apart. So somebody has to have that authority, and hopefully it's elders, we always
Yeah,
strive for
that's right.
reaching to train elders, encourage young men to become elders.
And I think you also need to be sure that, there's, like you say, there's a lot of work to be done. And you've got single men who aren't married, don't have any children. They need to know that they have a role. So, why does somebody have to have a title to be
They don't.
the one who can say, be in charge of the education department, or be in charge of something else? Give people things to do, and they don't need a title to do that. And particularly also women, I don't, the whole idea of a woman's place or whatever that just grates on me. So, women need to know that whether we use the title deaconess or not, which I guess that's a point of contention too, in some places. Again, women have important work to do, and they don't need a title to do that.
No,
And
they
we
just need to
encourage
volunteer.
I think everybody needs to know that they're welcome to be a servant in the church, and that they can be.
A servant, and the servant does what often organizes things and gets other people involved and works with other people, and boy, it begins to sound like that's a deacon. But a deacon is a different function than an elder is, and it's not necessarily a junior elder, is it? It's a different function, although
Some churches.
so often the deacons become elders.
Not us, not us. They call them in the making. Elder in the making or deacon in the making.
No, I don't see that in Church of Christ.
No, not in Church of Christ, I said.
I see.
I said not us.
So many churches have. A deacon is in charge of a particular area, and we have had that too. Dan was deacon in charge of education for
Still in.
many years. And
Until I give
we're
it-
not a
until I
deacon.
can pass it on.
But now Dan is the elder, and we've also had deacons that were just workers and didn't necessarily have deacon in charge of this or in charge of that. But just they
Dan keep
fulfilled the
that yard
qualifications.
pretty good too.
I'm sorry?
And Dan keep the church pretty nice too.
Okay, keeps the building up.
Yeah.
So, it's a servant role though. It's a servant role.
All is a servant role.
What's
At the
that?
end of the day, all is a servant role.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
All is a servant
All
role.
is a service.
I would also add, at the end of the day, most of these qualifications should fit just like everybody in the church.
Yeah.
Well, that's right.
Because we should all strive to live up to this calling for the elder. And maybe we're not gonna all be apt to teach or husbands of one wives or things like that, but these other things,
Yeah,
we should say, should fit all of us.
the deacons should be tested and, if you've been around, we've seen some situations here where that wasn't the case and it turned out bad. To put it mildly,
Yeah, we had to dismiss a few deacons over the years,
but,
proved not to be faithful.
Yeah.
They were doing something wrong, they were cheating on their wife or something, you
Yeah.
know, and unfortunately,
maybe we
Had to let 'em
didn't
go.
wait long enough before asking them to serve. And that's what the testing kind of comes into their given responsibility, see how that goes, and then take that next step.
I would just add, as I read this, just think about how difficult this must have been for Timothy to be this young man and then have to go into Ephesus and a place where you have people who came out of the world
Yeah,
and now he's gotta find these men and make them beyond reproach and all that and make them
Yeah.
elders. And he had a task on his hands.
well, that's
Yeah.
why, that's why he kind of infers that he's kind of timid, you know. You can understand that, he's been timid, Paul's basically telling him to man up and confront these people that need to be confronted. And that's hard, you're right, for a younger man to confront an older man, it's very hard. It's just psychological. They're not gonna listen too well.
we could go on and on, but the clock says it's time for us to, maybe we'll take it up again next time, but thank you for your thoughts and your wisdom, and I think it's particularly beneficial to get, well, how is it looked upon in Africa or down south or in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world? Sometimes they have a different slant on things, and it's something we can learn from,
So
so.
yeah, there's a lot of things when we learn it by this, when we are online in Africa. We
Yeah,
will normally channel with them to say how things go here, this how it is, this how it is. So that we are respecting certain things to see. The right thing to do.
well, thank you again, Roland. Take it up next time.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.
Yeah, we
Paid
don't-
by the elders.
Okay, thanks, Darlene.
All right.
I mean, just when they're paid, it kind of changes the dynamic.
Overnights.
I mean, he wouldn't go out to another place if you're paid by this group. He's talking about. No, Jake, talking about Africa.
So you like, now we're telling.
Paul would have said that it's a missionary, he should had a right to be supported in this congregation. Then when he moved on, he had a right to be supported.
Upstairs,
And,
over here.
So it's some of the power of a preacher here. Because they didn't want to lose all the money. Yeah, we. Oh, you're
Did you talk to Jan? Did you get to talk to her?
We knew.
She's happy.
She was out of town.
I respect that.
I thought she might have.
It's just like a lot of.
I mean, just,
Seems all right otherwise.